Go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Representative Bear.
Here.
Representative Burkhart,
Here.
Representative Duncan,
Here.
Representative Air,
Here.
Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Heiner,
Here.
Representative Sherwood,
Here.
Representative Western,
Here.
Chairman Greer.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning. We've got two bills to consider. Our Senate File 46, which is the cease and transfer priority bill that we do. And then Senate File 47, carbon storage sequestration liability that was worked through the interim. So we'll start with Senate File 46, get that knocked out. Hopefully only takes us a few minutes, but Director, if you would come forward with your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This particular bill is an annual recalibration for the cease and transfer program. We did submit an annual report back in October, has more details if there's interest there. But I'll do a quick walkthrough and it'll be relatively quick, I think. So on the bill, page 2, let me stop there. I kind of broke the protocol there. I'm Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality, and with me is Suzanne Ingalls, the Administrator for Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. Apologize for that.
Thank you. That's right. We were visiting earlier, so I kind of forgot that. Thank you.
So on page 2, line 2, section 1 provides definitions of terms. There are no changes from previous years in that section. Page 3, line 9 provides the update or the updated program priority list. There are 19 remaining projects. 8 of those are transfer facilities. Those transfer facilities have an estimated cost cost for the work of $8.8 million. There are 11 closure facilities with $22.4 million in estimated costs. So the total estimated need or cost for remaining projects is $31.2 million. The total available funds in the cease and transfer account are 18 million. So there's a difference of 13.2 million. We're not asking or requesting any additional funds for a couple of reasons. One, if you recall, the funding would be anywhere from 75% of the cost of the project to 100%. So if you take it at 75%, the responsibility of the local community could be as much as 7.8 million that we would have towards the cost.
So Director, the House passed a 6 million budget amendment to the landfill remediation account on Friday. It wasn't brought forward in the Senate, so we'll see where that goes.
Mr. Chairman, that's good news. However, that's landfill remediation program. And those funds would be used not for the cease and transfer program.
But Director, haven't we always just pulled those over when we needed to?
We have done that in the past.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The other source of funding to help cover those costs is there's 4.3 million in loans that'll be repaid over the next several years. So, and then in recent years, projects have come in under budget. So we've been able to save costs that way. Now the changes, there were a couple of changes to the projects, and that's in particular for Newcastle and Moorcroft. Their engineering estimates were provided before it was just staff assessments, and they weren't engineering estimates. Now we have those engineering estimates, so we've seen those changes. For Newcastle, it was estimated at 1.1 million for the closure project, and now it's at 3.7 million. For Moorcroft, it went from 500,000 estimate to an engineering estimate of 1.3 million. And then Rollins project went from a closure to a transfer, and the amount for that project is 780,000. On page 6, line 7, section 2, that repeals the 2021 session laws, chapter 103. And page 10, section 3 has the bill becoming effective immediately. So with that, we'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? This is just sort of an annual check and approval to make sure the program's moving well. So, okay. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak on this? Okay, we'll just keep you up here, Director, for the next bill. Go ahead and close public testimony. What's the committee's pleasure with Senate File 46? Moved by Heiner. Seconded by Western. Okay, any discussion, committee? Okay, question being called. Roll call vote for us, Barb.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Duncan. Aye. Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Western. Chairman Greer,
Aye.
9 aye.
Okay. Representative Bear, you want to floor manage this for us? Well, I was very enthusiastic.
Yeah, you want to do it. He'll do it.
Okay. All right, next item for our consideration, our next Senate file is carbon storage, sequestration, liability. We do have an engrossed copy, and I think I know the changes from the Senate, but so Director, you and your staff walk us through this, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality, and with me is Jennifer Zigmund, the Water Quality Division Administrator, the division that has the Class 6 UIC program. So this is Senate File 47, carbon storage sequestration liability. This was discussed at length during the interim. So Section 1, page 1, line 14, creates a new 3511-318, which addresses who has title to sequestered and injected carbon dioxide. Page 2, line 2, provides a definition of injector. And then page 2, line 7, covers the requirements of an injector. And those requirements would be they would have to have title to the CO2 that is injected into the stored underground or stored underground or within a unit area. And they would have to hold title for any injected or stored CO2 until the department issues a certificate of project completion. Page 2, line 7, or 17 rather, line 17. While the injector holds title, the injector is liable for any damage resulting from the injection or storage of the CO2. Page 3, line 1 creates a new 3511-319, which covers certificate of project completion, release, transfer of title, and custody. Once all requirements are met, the injector can apply to the DEQ for a certificate of project completion. The DEQ would then issue a certificate of completion only after all of the requirements are met, which includes all the requirements established in the Water Quality Rules and Regulations, Chapter 24 for post-injection site care and closure. And there would also have to be a public notice of the application, an opportunity for public comment in the public hearing. A certificate of completion is not to be issued until at least now, and this is one of the changes, I think, in the engrossed version, at least 20 years after CO2 injections end. On page 3, line 20, and this goes through page 5, a certificate of completion is not to be issued until the injector establishes to the satisfaction of the agency, the DEQ, that the injector is in full compliance with all laws governing the injection and storage of the CO2, The injector has addressed any pending claims. The underground place or pore space where CO2 is injected or stored is expected to no longer expand and poses no threat to health, safety, or the environment. All wells, equipment, and facilities are to be used for maintaining and managing the stored CO2 are in good condition and maintain mechanical integrity. And then lastly, the injector has plugged any injection wells and completed all reclamation required by the department. And on page 5, line 6, upon issuance of a certificate of completion, the title to the carbon dioxide and any facilities used to inject or store the CO2 shall be transferred to the state without payment or compensation. Title includes all rights and interests in and all responsibilities associated with stored or injected carbon dioxide. Primary responsibility and liability is transferred to the state. The injector is forever released from all regulatory requirements associated with the continued storage and maintenance of the CO2. Any bond or financial assurance is released, and the state, through the DEQ, assumes responsibility to manage and monitor until the federal government assumes responsibility for long-term monitoring. That takes us to page 11, line 2. Upon issuing a Class 6 UIC permit, the DEQ will issue a certificate that includes a statement that the permit has been issued, a description of the area covered, and any other appropriate information. The injector then will file a copy of the certificate with the county clerk. And then page 11, line 10 is the applicability of the new provisions 318 and 319, which includes reference to unitization. Section 2, and I'm going to back up a little bit. Section 2 started on page 6, line 17. I'm not going to get into the details on this because these are other agencies, but basically what's happening here, starting here, is just some conforming revisions to the changes to the references, the 318 and the 319. Section 3, page 14, line 1. This referenced the geologic sequestration special revenue account, and it specifies the uses of those funds in the account. The first is for testing, monitoring, and long-term inspections. The second purpose is for remediation of mechanical problems associated with the remaining wells and infrastructure. The third use would be for plugging and abandoning monitor wells. And then the fourth and last purpose is for all future claims associated with release of carbon dioxide for geologic sequestration sites following project completion. Section 4, page 15, line 2 are the provisions that apply to all holders of permits for geologic sequestration and to all orders of unitization of geologic sequestration sites before, on, or after the effective date. Section 5, page 15, line 11. DEQ is to take all actions necessary to implement the act. The Oil and Gas Commission and the Environmental Quality Council are to promulgate necessary rules, and the DEQ is to report to the Joint Minerals Committee the status of implementation by October 31, 2022. And then lastly, section 6, page 16, line 8 indicates that this act would become effective July 1, 2023, except for sections 5 and 6, which is the acts or actions necessary to implement. Now, so that's a quick run through on the bill. I do want to also just point out that we have throughout the interim been taking a look at this bill. We've visited with our attorneys to make sure that the bill did not in any way interfere with our primacy for the Class 6 program, and it does not, according to our review and our attorney's review. There are no impacts to rules, so we don't have to go back to rulemaking on our Chapter 24, and that was a big issue for us because it took us better part of a year to get that through EPA. And then I will say that it is consistent with North Dakota and they are the other state that has primacy for the Class 6 carbon sequestration program. So we currently have one UIC application or Class 6 UIC application in-house, and we anticipate one or two more within the first quarter of 2022. So with that, let's take any questions.
Okay, so Director, just on the dates, I'll ask a couple questions here real quick. Our last minerals meeting in 2022 will be 27th, 28th of October. You'll be ready to report live at that meeting.
Mr. Chairman, we'll probably have that report available October 1, so you'd have a chance to review.
Okay, I didn't know if we needed to change that date or not. You've been good about that. Okay, and then also the effective date on this is fine with the department. You'll be ready for it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's fine with the agency.
Okay, committee, any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How does this interact with the Governmental Claims Act? I don't see a waiver in here. So, I mean, the state's taken on the liability, and yet I don't see any amendment to the Governmental Claims Act. So would this just supersede because of these sections, or thanks?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I have an answer to that question at this time.
We can get somebody to give us that answer, but I don't, the Governmental Claims Act stays in place.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding on this bill, please correct me, that Mr. Chairman, my understanding on this bill is that basically the state takes on the title and the liability. So if the government has this immunity via the Governmental Claims Act, wouldn't you need to amend that? Or is it just not in the sort of thing that applies to? Anyway, that's the question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably
No,
understood it.
I thought this was vetted out during the I missed our
Okay.
last meeting.
Right.
So I would have hoped those were sincere questions. We would have done that at that meeting, but
Mr. Chairman.
yeah.
I
Go ahead,
did
Representative Bear.
raise the question at the last meeting as to whether or not the Attorney General had taken a look at this, and we got a no answer. I was hoping today maybe we'd hear from them.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should probably know this, but I had a question on page 6. It's line 11 through 15 talks about the federal government. If and when the federal government assumes responsibility, is that ever likely to happen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Air, my opinion would be that's not likely to happen in the near future.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Hey, did commission want to speak on this, bill, Supervisor? Or, okay. Anybody else wish to comment on the bill? Any other public testimony? Okay. Come on up, Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. I think the thing I like best about it is in discussion with some of my members, there was always a little confusion on who had the liability of this, if it was the landowner, the person injecting. And I think this bill, the best thing it does is it outlines that the owner of the pore space, which is associated with the surface unless you sever it, the landowner, the owner of the pore space has no liability. It's up to the company doing it. And then after that, should they satisfy all the requirements of the state takes the responsibility. So it removes that burden from the surface owner, the owner of the pore space. So sitting in support of the bill, with that, Mr. Chairman, committee, I'd sit for any questions.
Okay. Any questions, committee? So I think that Mr. Moline, coupled with legislation from, I don't know what it was, 6 years ago, where surface owners were held immune from liability associated with that. And with this bill, it does direct, at least provides that comfort, that comfort to landowners that they would not have liability.
Mr. Chairman, to not surprise you, but yes, sir, I agree.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Moline, committee?
Thank you,
Okay,
Chairman.
You
Committee.
bet. Must be a sleepy Monday. So, anyone else wishes to testify on Senate File 47?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. To the questions you were having earlier about the Governmental Claims Act, I would just direct you to page 14, lines 18 through 23. And this is about the special revenue account. So this has been existing law for a while, but specifically to note that the state doesn't waive any kind of immunity based on this bill. So just wanted to point that out.
No, good. Thank you. Yep. Go ahead, Representative Gray.
I'm very confused by that because my understanding conceptually on the bill was that the government was taking title and then was taking liability. So it's taking liability and then it's exerting its immunity. So
Yeah.
it's just out there. Nobody has liability really, right? I mean, the state's taking it, but they're exerting their immunity.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, there is this special revenue account. The challenge with that is there's no money in that special revenue account. And so the idea is once the state takes title and ownership and liability of dealing with the problems, hopefully there will be a pot of money available to deal with those problems should they arise, but there is no money in that account at this time. I think, there's ways creatively for landowners to deal with poor space leases and other kinds of conditions of approval. And I hope landowners do that when they lease poor space to think about the long-term issues going forward. But again, we were most concerned, as Mr. Moline was, about the Title 34 inclusion in the bill, and we're glad that that's there. So at least it's clear the landowner doesn't have liability. But I think there is still an open-ended question about if there's money and problems later on, like what happens. I mean, hopefully with the 20 years, I think that also helps. So we supported the amendment in the Senate because hopefully these sites will be stable. There will be very minimal risk, I think, going forward for the state if the site completion process works as intended. But there is that open-ended question, I think, on long-term liability.
Director, you look like you had a thought. But yeah, okay. Any further questions from Ms. Anderson? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director.
So, Mr. Chairman, hopefully this will be helpful for the question and the conversation. And I think the response by Ms. Anderson was correct in that it kind of directs you to the expenditures from the account. Through this process, there's a 7 cent per ton charge towards the special revenue account. And what's being referenced in paragraph D on page 14, I believe, is talking about utilizing that fund and the fact that that fund exists for the use by the agency. The fact that it exists doesn't necessarily intend a waiver of its sovereign immunity. It doesn't mean that the state won't take those actions using that special revenue account.
So I think, Director, and I guess that's what the way I thought about it is that with that fund and then these specific items are listed in here, we'd have the obligation, we being a state, to follow up on that, which are all environment to protect the environment and the landowners. So, and that would, it's in statute, you have to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any further questions? Okay. Any further public testimony? Okay. Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Richard Garrett. I'm here today representing the Environmental Defense Fund. And just a quick aside, just a week ago, it was 30 degrees and going down to 0. And today it's 30 and going up to 60. And that's a pretty nice change in our beautiful state. The Environmental Defense Fund's mission is to preserve the natural systems on which all life depends. And the organization is guided by both science and economics. It finds practical and lasting solutions to the most serious environmental problems. And it's one of the world's leading environmental organizations and has been driving results for over 50 years. The organization takes on climate change and other grave threats by identifying what's most urgent and where it can make the most difference. So today, I hope to make that difference here in House Minerals Committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few brief thoughts with you. Please make no mistake, EDF supports and has long supported carbon capture, sequestration, use, and reuse. When guided by science, together with the analysis of geologic formations and comprehensive long-term in perpetuity, potentially monitoring, we believe CCS will be a critical part of how we address effectively climate change with a market-based solution. I should add here that Wyoming has long been a leader in this space. I believe the chairman referenced that leadership, and this legislature took the bull by the horns and crafted some really comprehensive legislation around this opportunity. The bill as written is one that we believe may allow a challenge to the state's primacy. And I know that you're concerned about that. And we've heard that that is a concern that is not necessarily shared by others. However, Environmental Defense Fund believes that this is a critical part of this bill and that we need to make sure that we understand whether our state's hard-earned primacy will be at risk. I don't believe that we've heard this morning that the bill incorporates, or the bill's purpose is to better position Wyoming in a competitive marketplace, but we have heard that elsewhere. I should let you know that in Texas, that state, and I apologize if I made a mistake by mentioning that state's name. Thank you. That state's regulatory body, the Texas Railroad Commission, is poised to adopt rules around this very subject. And those rules, as they are drafted, provide for liability in perpetuity on the part of the operator. We've heard in other comments, not necessarily this morning, that we really need to get moving on this. And I don't disagree. It's been 10 years or more, and opportunity is slipping us by. Climate change is very real, and it's important that we protect future generations. But this bill is relying on future generations. It's laying the groundwork for future generations to take that bull by the horn. And I think that it's our obligation to preserve as much optionality as possible for them. There have been excursion incidents in other states, Texas and Mississippi. And I think it's important that the committee understand that this is not foolproof technology. We believe that for these reasons that the bill should continue to be one that is an interim topic, and that the questions raised in comments, both by the committee and by others, suggest that as a reasonable path forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions, and I really appreciate your time today.
Any questions, committee? Richard, I don't see any. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members.
Anyone else wishes to testify on this? Any more public comment? Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. What's the committee's pleasure? Okay, moved by Western, seconded by Burkhart. Any discussion, committee?
Final comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I voted no on this in committee, but didn't make any comments in Casper, and I am going to vote no again. I wanted to make a couple comments. I just think that the way it's written where in perpetuity, the state of Wyoming is going to be taking on liability for this. I think that's a pretty big change. I also think the bill doesn't make a ton of sense to me because at one point on page 5, it says that we are taking on liability. And then as Ms. Anderson pointed out on page, I believe 14, it basically says this doesn't constitute a waiver of the Governmental Claims Act or doesn't constitute a waiver of liability. So I just think it contradicts itself in places. It's not clear then what this actually means. It also isn't clear to me exactly what this means for industry. I mean, we have not heard, I mean, we did hear Mr. Moline, but the minerals industry, I think there was one person in Casper that testified. We aren't hearing from them again here today. I understand the landowner perspective on this though, but I'm just not comfortable voting for this. I have a lot of questions and it was worked pretty quick. So I'm just gonna be voting no. Thanks.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also will be voting no. We received testimony at the last interim meeting that stated that should a company go out of business, the state would take on liability without this bill. And so the bill proposes that we would take on liability after this certification so that the company can get out from underneath that without having to go out of business. It does give us the advantage of getting title on that in case we could use that CO2 for other purposes. But it seems to me like it's setting us up for potential liable suits that we might not need. And so I was hoping that we'd hear from the AG's office today as to their interpretation of what the liability would be before this took place or this certification took place and or after. But I'd like it to be an interim topic because we haven't heard from them. Thank you.
Okay, any further comment? I'll just comment a little bit. I kind of struggled with this bill from the get-go myself, and I went back and forth on it. And part of this is you look at a regulatory structure for the state of Wyoming, it keeps us competitive, and in particular competitive when we're dealing with carbon capture. And so we have been in a horse race with North Dakota, who had the foresight to establish and set up, I forget the name of it now, but it's basically their energy commission where they have got funds and they can push research forward. Wyoming didn't do that, but we've managed to catch up with them. You know, we look at even under the past administration and the current administration, you know, a desire to see carbon capture in a coal-fired generation plant. And part of that is the sequestration component of it. And while there may be some uncertainties with this liability, this discussion is a discussion that lays a framework so that we can continue to have the discussion. Just because we move this forward doesn't mean we don't keep looking at the issue. And I guess I'm a little frustrated, you know, when we have this is an interim topic that we're not thinking about these things in May rather than coming back around in February and discussing it. And so that's one of the things I would ask of this committee as we go into this next interim is to start thinking our subjects through and ask the hard questions early and get the answers to the interim. That's our job. So that's a little bit of a lecture and I apologize, but you know, these things should be pushed earlier on these questions and vetted out. So in any event, it's Monday. Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the committee as a whole has been very pro coal, trying to maintain this resource in our state that's carried us for so many decades. We've enacted numerous pieces of legislation over the last little while to prolong the life of our coal. And we've focused on carbon capture, but without doing something for storage, it's moot point. So if we're so viable to keeping our coal plants going and we don't provide a way for sequestration, why are we doing all this to try to force our utilities to utilize carbon capture on their power plants if there's nowhere to go with it? So I see this as a very integral part of what we're trying to do to save this resource in our state. And if we stop at this point, all this work up to this point is not going to do us any good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'll go with Representative Duncan. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on Representative Heiner, this is truly us moving forward for some economic development potentials, some diversification potentials, and we keep getting criticized over and over about not doing enough. And so truly, sorry, there's lots of feedback here. Truly, this is,
Sorry.
to me, the next step, the logical step. Industry's asked for it, and we need to continue to move on. And this is one of those feel-good bills in terms of the landowners are happy, the environmentalists are happy, the industry's happy. So why not?
Good, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just want to point out that there was nobody representing those that are looking at this technology that testified here today. Zero, Zippo. And so I mean, we keep hearing, this is probably the 15th bill since I've been here that I've heard the argument that this is what needs to be passed to get carbon capture going. And, that's just not enough for me on the last day from just members being told, like, I need to hear some testimony. And so I haven't heard it and it really didn't come today. So, I mean, I understand, this is one of the reasons why I didn't comment at the last meeting. I mean, because, anytime you start asking questions and they say, well, you're not supporting industry, blah, blah. I support industry. Okay. I've supported coal, oil, gas, many ways and continue to do so. But I just, at some point, we need to get answers on these questions as to what this actually means concretely. I mean, I appreciated the chairman sharing the ExxonMobil thing the other day, but I am getting a little weary of every year, hearing that this is the last thing we need to do to get carbon capture, and not hearing what it's actually going to mean on the ground. And we didn't get that today. So I am going to be voting no. Thank you.
So I think that's a good comment in terms of it. Sometimes it's difficult for industry because they're not fully aligned on where they want to be. So we don't see the full industry reps here today to comment on it because different companies have a little different views. They can't come to an alignment on it. And it would be very nice and very useful for those industries that see this as being positive for them to come and testify and tell us how this would be useful or how this could be used. And that's sort of the education that we do need. I agree with those comments wholeheartedly. So anyway, okay. Does anyone have do you want me to walk the bill one page at a time, or are we just ready to vote? Since everybody's ready to vote. Okay, we'll go ahead and actually make a pretty early morning on it, and we'll take a roll call vote on Senate File 47.
Representative Bear,
No.
Representative Burkhart, aye by absentee. Vice Chairwoman Duncan. Aye. Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray.
No.
Representative Heiner. Representative Sherwood. Representative Western.
No.
Chairman Greer.
Aye.
6 ayes, 3 no.
Any volunteer? Representative Gray, you want to carry that on the floor for the committee? We'll work on that later. Okay. With that, we are